Hey, in this video we'll be talking about loops and how to make things repeat themselves. Sometimes we write some code that we would like to not write a whole bunch of times in a row to make an effect happen. So take a look at my Hello World program right here in Visual Studio. If I wanted to repeat this line, console.writeLine hello world, it would make sense to just copy it over a whole bunch of times. And I could run that and it would say hello world 6 times. But what if I didn't want to just copy my code? If I wanted to actually tell the computer to do the repetition instead of myself, I could use what's called a loop. So first I should create a variable that's going to control my loop. So this becomes such a common pattern that it's called a loop control variable, but I just need an integer, and I can use that as my loop control variable. I'll call it I just for now. It's also pretty common for loop control variables to be very short, and their names, their identifiers, not very descriptive, so this is an example of that. I equals 0. We'll start it off at 0. And we will create a loop using this while keyword. While, and then open parenthesis. And then you want a condition in here. So it's a lot like an if statement, except instead of just executing if it's true, it'll execute if it's true, and then it'll repeat while it's still true. So let's say while I is less than 6. So right now, I is less than 6. So the body of this loop, the part in the curly braces, is going to be executed. So I is 0 for the first time. We go in here. It's less than 6, so this evaluates to true. And because that's true, it executes this block for the loop. That block is just writing hello world to the console. And then it will repeat. So it goes back up to test this condition again, I less than 6, and I hasn't changed, so it's still 0. This will keep looping forever. What I need to do is change I inside this loop so that the loop ends at some point. So what I'm going to do is just add 1 to I. So I will start at 0, it will go through this loop, and every time that we go through the loop, I will increase by 1. And this condition will eventually return false. At some point, I is going to be greater than or equal to 6. And then it'll fail, and then it'll finish the loop, and it won't run again. So when we press start, I get the same output I had, except I wrote it as a loop instead of just copying and pasting. So one of the huge benefits here is that if I were copy and pasting, I would have to copy and paste like 20 more times if I wanted it to print 26 times. But with a loop, this is the only change I need to make. Just how many times am I going to loop depends on my control variable. So while is the very simplest kind of loop, and there are 2 other ones, so I'll show you those. There's another one called a for loop, and the for loop has this, it's sort of a simplification, I guess, encapsulation of this idea of using a control variable. Because it's such a common thing to do, the for loop was created to keep it all contained in one place. So let's say I have another integer called j, and that's going to be my control variable. I'm going to start it off at 0, just like before, and it's totally okay if I started it at 1 and counted from there. Just conventionally, this is a common way to start your loops, starting them at 0 if you're just going to be counting up. So I can say for int j equals 0, which declares and initializes the j variable, and then a semicolon. And in this same parentheses part, I have another expression that's going to be, j less than 10, let's say, and that's the control variable test, just like we had in the while loop. And then comes an increment part that happens every time that this loop is executed. So let's say j plus equals 1. So this will have the same effect as what we saw before. Let me just copy this over. Using for loop. Alright, so now we have the for loop, which in its parentheses takes a lot more. It looks more complicated at first, but because it's all contained in one place for this loop, it's actually more readable. It's faster to read this kind of loop when you're looking at someone else's code. So we initialize our control variable, we test it every time it goes through the loop, and then the increment happens every time that the loop is executed. So the first time we start off, j will be 0, and we test to see if j is less than 10. That evaluates to true, so we enter the loop. The loop body has just one command, and then it's done. And when it's done, it goes up to the top here again to perform the increment part, j plus equals 1. So j increases by 1. It becomes 1. And then we do the test again, check to see if 1 is less than 10. It is. And then we do the body again because that evaluated to true. So this will keep going and going, incrementing j and testing j against 10. And when it eventually gets to 10, it will have gone through this loop 10 times. Let's try it out. There we go. So I think I did 26 of those hello worlds. And then these using for loop statements, there are 10 of them. Looks pretty good. So you can also count down. Let's see. I'll write a for loop for int, let's say, well, we can reuse j because it won't conflict with any other variables in this scope. J equals 0, j is less than, let's start at 10 and we'll count down. J is greater than 0. J minus equals 1. Alright, and then we'll have something in here. Console to write line, counting down. And let's concatenate j on here. Alright, let's give that a try. So counting down, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and it's done. So there are a couple of other ways that you might see to change these variables, especially when you're using loops. I've been using this compound assignment operator, plus equals, minus equals, but there are some shorter ones. There are two of them in particular that do exactly this. So I'm going to change this to j plus plus and j minus minus. So these are called increment operators and decrement operator. So the increment operator just adds 1 to whatever variable it's used on. J plus plus just increases j by 1. And j minus minus decrements, decreases j by 1. And there are equivalent ones for most cases that go in front. So you can see this operator in front of the variable that it's operating on or after it. The different positions have different names, so this is a prefix operator, plus plus, and this is a postfix operator plus plus. So prefix increment and postfix increment. The details aren't that important right now, but we'll be talking about those further later on. You can write them either way, prefix or postfix in these increment parts of your loops, and they'll do the same thing. There are just some cases where they do act differently. So either way, when I run this, this will print just like it did before when I was using the compound assignment operators. Alright, so we can count up, we can count down, we can repeat stuff over and over and over, however many times we want. And there's another type of loop, the last type of loop that we use in C#, called a do-while loop. So the do-while loop has a structure like this. It starts with a do, and then the body of the function. And then it has the while and its condition at the end. Now this, you'll note, ends with a semicolon. So that's kind of important. It'll complain at you if you leave that off. And a do-while loop is useful because it performs this block of code, this body of the loop, at least once, and then it checks the condition before it decides to loop again. So sometimes this is handy for particularly getting input from the console. So let me try console.writeLine. Enter a number less than 5. Okay, so I'm prompting the user to enter a number, and then I might create a string variable and use console.readLine input. I should actually put this, well, I'll parse it in a different line. Yeah, I'll put this out here. So let me declare my variable outside of this do block so that I can use it in this expression. Input equals console.readLine, and we're going to create an integer out here too. This is going to be, I'll just call it number. That's what we're going to be testing. So what I might do is I want them to enter a number less than 5, and I want to keep asking them if they don't enter one that's less than 5. So if I want to keep asking, I'll keep prompting them, and I'll keep using the readLine command to get their input. And then I will check to see what they've got. So I want to make sure that they have given us something that can be interpreted as an integer, and if it's not an integer, then I'll keep looping. So let's say int.tryParse, and we'll be parsing the input and putting it out into the number variable. So this tryParse is going to return true if it successfully parsed that integer. It will return false if it failed. But what I want it to do is keep looping if it fails and be done with the loop if it succeeds. So I actually want the opposite of what it does normally. And so I can use the not operator, exclamation point, to kind of flip that around so that if it fails to parse it as an integer, then it'll ask you again for another integer. I also want to make sure that this integer is less than 5. So while if we fail, or well, if we're failing, yeah, here we go. Or, because that was an and, our number is greater or equal to 5. Then we want to ask again. So two things here are going to cause us to keep asking. Either they typed in something that was not a number, or their number was greater than or equal to 5. when we run this, enter a number less than 5. That's not a number, so it keeps asking me. 778 is not less than 5, so it keeps asking. 5 is not less than 5. 3. There we go. So it went through to the end of the program. And we're good. So that's what a do-while loop is, and it's pretty useful sometimes. Pretty rarely used, but it does come in handy. And then there's one last thing we can do. We can take loops and we can use them inside other loops. So this will get kind of crazy. Let me clear out what I have here. And let's see. Let's say I have, I want to draw a pattern like something out of asterisks like this. All right, I'd love to make that, but write a program that can make that for me so I don't have to type it out every time. That would be great. And so the user can have some control over it, perhaps. So I'm going to start off with a loop. For int I equals 0, we'll say that maybe this is how many, maybe I is how many stars that we want to be drawing. So let's change this to num stars. So we want to start with 1 star, and we want to go until num stars is less than or equal to 5. So 5 is going to be the maximum number of stars. And then every time we go through this loop, we have 1 star, we have 3, we have 5, we have 3, we have 1. Well, we're kind of increasing for a while. So let's add some number. We're adding 2 each time, but then after a little bit it changes. So we're not adding 2 anymore, we're subtracting 2. So let's leave it like this for now, and we'll go back and we'll fix it once we get further into this. So this will start at 1, it will go up to 5 counting by 2. So 1, 3, 5. And then in this loop, I need to actually print out the stars. So how am I going to print out 1 star sometimes, and 3 stars sometimes, or 5 stars sometimes? Well, one way to do it is to put a loop in here. Let's just say I'll just call it star. So we'll start at star 0, and we will count up until we're at num stars. And star plus star will increment our star variable so that it'll keep increasing. And now we can do console.write. I'm not doing write line because I want these stars to be right next to each other. I don't want new lines between them. I'll do console.write, and this will write 1 star for every one of the num stars we have. And after this inner loop, I have written out, first time around, I'm going to write out 1 star, then I'm going to write out 3 stars. Between those, I need a new line. So I'll do console.writeLine, and I'm not going to put anything in it, it's just going to end the line. So let me run this and we'll see what we've got so far. Alright, 1, 3, 5. It's getting there, it's getting closer. There's another thing that's missing. I want some spaces in there. If you compare these, there's, let's see, 2 spaces in front of the first one, 1 space in front of the second one, 0 spaces in front of the third one. So there's a kind of pattern that you can notice. If you have 1 star, then you should have 2 spaces. 3 stars, you should have 1 space. 5 stars, you should have 0 spaces. 2, 1, 0. So there's definitely a pattern counting down the number of spaces, and there's a relationship between the number of stars you have and the number of spaces you need to print out. So let me see. I'm going to need another loop. I told you this is going to get crazy. I'm going to need another loop so that I can print out these spaces for, let's see, int space equals 0. Oops. Space is less than, let me think. I think less than or equal to, and we have to calculate how many spaces we're going to have. So let me just pretend we're going through. We're going to have, we're going to start off with 1 star. And if we have 1 star, we should have 2 spaces. And the other numbers we're dealing with here, there's a 5, and there's the increment, which happens each time, which probably isn't related. But we know that our maximum number of stars is going to be 5. And when it's at our maximum, let's say 5, we're going to have 0 spaces. So let's say, I think that should be less than. So let's do 5 minus num stars, like that. I'll group them just to make it a little clearer. And then plus plus space. That'll increment our space variable. Console.write, and we'll write a space. All right. So far, this isn't going to give us the right number of spaces, but it'll give us something to look at, something to think about. 5 minus num stars. So the first time through, it's going to print out 4 spaces. The next time through, this is going to be 3, and this will print out 2 spaces. And then the third time through, it's going to be 5. We're going to print out 0 spaces. So let's see. Yep. 4 spaces, 2 spaces, 0 spaces. 4, 2, 0. When we actually wanted 2, 1, 0. So we're getting twice as many spaces as we want. So I can just divide this by 2, and that should get us there. Let me run it. Nice. That looks a lot better. All right. Got the spaces right. And now we have to deal with the other half of this, this diamond that I'm printing. And so I need some way to control how this num stars is changing. It's starting at 1, goes to 3, goes to 5, then it should go back to 3, and then back to 1. So there are probably a few ways to do this. I think the easiest way to think about is to be changing our increment. We've been increasing by 2, increasing by 2, and then we want to decrease by 2, decrease by 2. So I'm going to make a variable called increment. I'll set it to 2, and I'll use that here, increment. So now it's going to do the exact same thing, except it's using a variable instead to do the increment. And what I'd like it to do is that when it gets to 5, it's going to change the increment to -2. So we'll start subtracting from the stars. So let's put an if statement in here. If num stars, let's be safe, greater than or equal to 5, then we want increment to be equal to -2. All right. That's getting us close. This will change our increment so that it goes back down. But now we have to be careful about our test. If we ran this, it would probably run forever because num stars would get to 5 then the increment would bring it back down, and it would keep going further and further negative, and this loop would never end. So I actually want to change this loop test so that num stars is always, let's say, greater than 0. When we get back down to 0 stars or negative 1 stars, then we should stop. All right, I'm going to run it. Hope it works. Ooh, yeah, that looks nice. Looks pretty good. And now, one really useful thing we can do is parameterize some of the constants we used. So I'm going to just do it to one of them. Do you see this number 5? We have 5 in a couple of places. That was like our maximum number of 5s. So why don't I just call it that? Max stars. Sorry, maximum number of stars. Max stars. And I'll add a variable, int max stars equals, well, let's start with 5. So we haven't changed anything. We've really just put it into a variable, and we're using that variable instead of using the number 5. So sometimes those are called magic numbers, if you just have numbers that happen to make your code work. It's often better to give them a name by storing them in a variable. Max stars means a lot more than 5 does if someone's reading my code. So I'll give that a go. Looks like it works the same as before, but now I can change it. I'm going to just change it to odd numbers because I think that'll work best. Max stars 7. Ooh, yeah. Max stars, oh, let's go a little bigger. Let's go 13. Nice. That is pretty cool. All right, so that's a more complicated way of using loops. I hope you enjoyed that. I did. And I will see you next time.